Investigation into the Hillsborough disaster have appeared at Preston Crown Court. They included the former Chief Constable Sir Norman Bettison, who is charged with misconduct in a public office. The hearing was taken up with procedural matters and no pleas were entered, although all the men have previously indicated they will plead not guilty. Now, this time yesterday, we reported on the plight of Rohingya Muslims fleeing violence in Myanmar. Today, the country's civilian leader, the Nobel laureate Aung San Suu Kyi, described reports of the crisis as a huge iceberg of misinformation. In the last 12 days, nearly 150,000 Rohingyas have arrived in neighbouring Bangladesh. Many have accused Myanmar's military of murder and rape. Caroline Hawley reports.
The exodus seems to be accelerating. Terrified Rohingyas are fleeing from Myanmar however they can. Several children are said to have drowned today trying to escape to Bangladesh.
They burned our houses. We couldn't take our belongings. We were hiding near a hill for 2 days. We were there in the rain without food and with my children. When we heard the sound of shooting, we took a boat and crossed the sea to come here to Bangladesh.
The refugees bring with them new reports of atrocities that have drawn international condemnation. The world had hoped the country's de facto leader would use her moral authority to speak out. Aung San Suu Kyi won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1991 for her non-violent struggle for democracy and human rights. Here she was accepting it in 2012. She'd spent 15 years under house arrest during the country's military rule. But today, at a press conference with the Indian Prime Minister, Aung San Suu Kyi was conspicuously silent on the victims of Myanmar's military crackdown. She said misinformation was distorting reality, and she blamed terrorists for the crisis.
We believe that together we can work to make sure that terrorism is not allowed to take root on our soil or on the soil of our neighbouring countries.
So, who are the Rohingya? They're Muslims who face discrimination and persecution for decades in mainly Buddhist Myanmar, which considers them illegal immigrants from Bangladesh. But Bangladesh denies that they're its citizens. Many were forced from their villages by communal violence in Rakhine State in 2012. The latest refugee crisis has been caused by what the military is calling clearance operations, following attacks by Rohingya militants on police positions. 150,000 Rohingyas have fled Myanmar in the last 2 weeks alone. More than 230,000 have escaped to Bangladesh since last October. Malala Yousafzai, a fellow recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize, this week called on Aung San Suu Kyi to condemn what she called the tragic and shameful treatment of the Rohingyas. Aid agencies haven't been allowed into the areas they're fleeing from, and the UN Secretary-General has warned that this crisis could spiral into a humanitarian catastrophe. Caroline Hawley, BBC News.
And the time is 16 minutes past 6. Our top story this evening. The government's rejected suggestions it will turn its back on EU workers after Brexit, but says the current immigration system must change. And still to come, we'll hear from Jennifer Lawrence, the world's highest paid actress, about the gender pay gap in Hollywood and her new film, Mother.
Later on BBC London, more police on patrol and a murder investigation in East London after a 14-year-old boy dies after being shot in the head. And reaction from parents in Croydon to a £130 fine for dropping their kids off at school.
For decades now, British scientists have been receiving billions of pounds for research from the European Union. Since the referendum, they've been worried about what happens to that funding. Well, the government's answer came in the form of its latest position paper. Ministers hope to negotiate a special status for the UK's membership of the European Union's science funding bodies. Here's our science editor, David Shookman.
European funding underpins much of British science. It supports the search for a new clean source of energy with this experimental fusion reactor near Oxford. It helps the exploration of graphene, an astonishing material with huge industrial potential. And it contributes to research into flooding and how best to predict it. And because of links like this, a new government paper recognises that a deep relationship should continue after Brexit. And research leaders are relieved.
It's very encouraging in both its tone and its aspirations. but it's clear that there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done to hammer out the details of an eventual agreement.
Over the years, British scientists have done well with European funding. Between 2007 and 2013, they received £8 billion in grants. And that's £3 billion more than the UK paid to the EU research budget. So where does this go? Well, here's one example. At Imperial College in London, mosquitoes are used to investigate a vaccine for malaria, part of a multinational European project. Dozens of teams here, and literally thousands across the UK, benefit from EU funding. The government hopes that this can continue, but no one is sure exactly how. What scientists are desperate to find out is exactly what kind of future relationship there'll be with the European Union. Will it be like Norway and Switzerland, which are outside the EU but in its science programme? And for that, they have to pay and accept freedom of movement. Or will there be some other unique arrangement for Britain? Whatever it is, it's going to take some serious negotiation. A key issue is freedom of movement for scientists. Of this team of 12 at the Francis Crick Institute, 10 are from EU countries, and they feel uncertain.
It is a concern, and it is one that plays on all of our minds, and that is possibly leading to at least some people beginning to contemplate offers elsewhere, which they may not have contemplated before.
Jet stream is building nicely.
From researching the jet stream and how it affects our weather, to investigating the deep ocean, British science is integrated with a wider European effort. Unpicking that, or adjusting it, won't be easy. David Shukman, BBC News.
The BBC has announced that it's conducting 3 wide-ranging reviews into pay following the controversy over presenter salaries this summer. 2 will look into equal pay across the corporation. The other will be a review of pay and diversity for on-air stars. Our media editor, Amal Rajan, is here. Now, there was quite an outcry at the time. What is the BBC's response?
Well, George, I think, as you say, the speech by Tony Hall, the Director General today, was pretty significant because it was his first big speech on the subject since that outcry. And he says, as you suggest, there are 3 big things going on. There's an internal audit looking at gender pay. There's an external audit looking at all BBC staff and the issue of equal pay, so whether or not different people doing the same job are being paid the same amount or not. And on top of that, a slightly newer thing, I think, is that there's a look at this issue of on-air talent, which is the big issue that caused so many headlines earlier in the summer. Now, lots of people have identified the problems facing the BBC. That doesn't make it easy for the BBC to identify the solutions, because the trouble is, if you're trying to get equality in a public sector organisation, you can either do it by raising the salaries of those who are lower down, but that could prove inflationary, or you reduce the salaries of those at the top, but that could prove controversial because you get lots and lots of legal action and big public disputes. So the sense I have, George, talking to people here, is that there is a serious attempt to address the burning injustice of equality or the lack of equality at the BBC, but we are a long way from finding real and concrete solutions, or even, frankly, knowing the scale of the problem. And that's why these 3 reviews are going on.
Well, thanks very much. Thank you. A DNA test carried out on the body of the Spanish artist Salvador Dali has shown that a woman was wrong to claim he was her father. Dali died in 1989. His body was exhumed in July from a crypt in Figueres so that samples could be taken to settle the paternity claim. Maria Pilar Abel Martinez, a tarot card reader, had maintained that her mother had had an affair with the artist in 1955. More than 400 pupils at a comprehensive school in Aberystwyth were given detention on their first day back from the summer holidays for breaking school uniform rules. Ysgol Penglais changed its uniform policy for the new school term, but a third of the pupils, the ones who were given detention, are believed to have been wearing clothes or shoes that didn't comply with the new policy. Some parents have started a petition saying their children had been treated unfairly. Jennifer Lawrence was the highest paid actress in the world last year. She's made her name and her fortune playing gritty roles, and her new part in the dark psychological thriller Mother is no exception. Our arts editor, Will Gompertz, has been to meet the 27-year-old Oscar winner ahead of the film's UK premiere.
We spend all our time here. I want to make a paradise.
Jennifer Lawrence is the eponymous mother, house-proud and devoted to her husband, a much older literary man, played by Javier Bardem.
What do they want?
Their domestic bliss turns into a living nightmare. In a metaphor-rich, effects-laden horror movie, which the critics are slamming and lauding in equal measure.
I'm so sorry.
There will be no with anybody who sees the movie. It's not enjoyable while you're watching it. It's hard to watch. It's an assault. You know, if I was writing a review while I was watching it, I would be like, don't go, If you sit with it a little bit and you give yourself 30 minutes, 45 minutes when you get home and you sit with it, you realize how important it is.
He's a stranger. We're just gonna let him sleep in our house.
Hello.
Hello.
Did you know he had a wife?
What was in it that was important?
Everyone's going to, what's great about it is everybody will walk away with something that resonates with them. For me, it was what would happen if we treated our planet with care, with humanity. Pulling out of the Paris climate deal was not a good step.
No.
That's what keeps the marriage going. This is all just setting. Oh, you do want them.
And what about gender in Hollywood, something you talked a lot about, so how Hollywood treats women? Do you think it's still deeply unfair, the game's rigged in Hollywood?
I do, yeah. I think there's still a lot of unfairness, and we are making changes. The gap is very slowly closing, but there's still work to be done.
Did you make sure, for instance, that you got paid the same amount or even more than Javier Bardem in this movie?
I didn't look at what Javier was getting. I just knew what I deserved, and I fought for that.
And if you found out he was being paid more?
There would be a phone call.
You would have a word.
Jennifer Lawrence speaking to our arts editor, Will Gompertz. Now, for 50 years, he's been the voice of football, but now John Motson has decided to hang up his microphone and his sheepskin coat.
It takes Ahoy to make mint chocolate chip cookies and other ice cream inspired flavors. New from Chips Ahoy.